I think, in my opinion, it often depends on the size of the company or the organization. But if you have more than a dozen or so employees, you should always be thinking about the next phase of growth for the organization, which translates to growth amongst the people, and then how will you staff for it, right? There's always going to be a need to hire additional staff. But certainly if you have some sort of leadership pipeline, the best place to look for more talent is right inside your own four walls, right? Um, and beyond that, other than highly technical positions, you should always be thinking about the next move within the organization for anyone that you hire. So you're always hiring for the next position if you can. I mean, there's technical roles that don't allow you to do that, right? But for many of the people that you bring in, you want to be thinking about what you can do to get them to the next level. And then always try to hire people with a high career ceiling, if you can.
I was just going to say assessing the skill gaps and assessing who you have currently within your organization. I believe that internal recruiting is really important. So it's important to hear those key issues from a leader and help them guide them into good development tracks, helping the employees that are already there, giving them goals, a trajectory, something to look forward to, maybe even moving someone from one department to another. Maybe they weren't a good fit in one department. So I think a leader needs to assess that and understand what the strengths and weaknesses are of their current staff. And then also, if there's still gaps, that's when you definitely need to start looking for talent.
For me, there can be like two buckets, right? The first one is assess the technical skills that apply to the job so that you know that you're hiring that person for that particular job. But secondly, examine the soft skills that are required as well to be successful in that specific position. For example, you don't train an engineer in the same way you train a salesperson, right? I mean, bottom line, while soft skills can be deployed across an entire organization, there are many nuances that need to be examined within that training. For example, a business development rep or a salesperson needs superior listening skills, while a staff accountant may need training around interoffice relationships. They're both soft skills, right? But they kind of have different application.
Do they have a culture of learning and a culture of development? Because that's something they need to look at themselves. Are they training to have a succession of employees that rise up within their organization, or do they need to look at what's going on? If they don't believe in training, then it's going to be hard to, support them in that sense. So having a champion, I guess we like to say, our team likes to say, is always important.
I think it's also important for the team members to want to, right? Like we have a lot of young people who come into the industry, into any industry, right? And there's not a lot of want to start at the bottom. They always want to come in at a certain level. So I do think it is upon the individuals who want to develop and who show that initiative, because I think that's kind of a lost art form that is much needed.
It depends on the size of the organization, right? I mean, obviously, bigger companies culturally may have different philosophies around training. I spent some time in the UPS organization in a senior management role long time ago. And they're a company that prioritizes training as a cornerstone across the entire organization. And because of that, and it's a big company, obviously, but they always have a healthy pipeline of people who are capable of taking the next step. And that becomes, as Des mentioned earlier, it's cultural, right? On the flip side of that, there's an old saying that holds that when business condition gets tough, oftentimes training is the first to get cut or reduced, right? So, Wiser, we feel that this paradigm is backwards. You should double down on training, examine employee engagement, and seek out resources that will keep your team happy and engaged. If you abandon training completely and if they've been exposed to it and they're used to being involved in training at some level, when you just take it away, that's kind of a recipe for disaster. And in terms of content, always keep the end goal in mind. If you don't have goals set for your content and delivery, you got to start there, right? And today's employees, especially like the Gen Z mindset, they want to consume their training in bite-sized chunks. And we found this out, through trial and error, video micro courses, creating a path, and then, to an end goal through a series of multiple short courses typically resonate better with all employees, not just Gen Z. Gone are the days of these 2-day seminars with homework where you go into a hotel for 2 days and then you got to go do 4 hours of work after everyone's done, and you can't go to the bar. What we found is people aren't wired that way anymore. And the best training outcomes come from tracks and or micro courses that converge. And that's how we built the training components of the Wiser platform. Comes down to leadership at some level, right? So the most obvious outcome of poor leadership is employee turnover and the lack of any meaningful culture. Whereas turnover is easy to measure, cultural effectiveness is a challenge, right? It's kind of, you talk about soft skills, that's like soft skills. It bubbles up over time, but at the end of the day, certainly operationally, it's extremely costly to have high turnover, both in terms of lost production and the HR management costs that go with it, right? If you've got a big company that's turning over, 20, 30, 40%, and they're out there, think about the training staff that's required, the onboarding time, all of the documentation, all the background checks. It's a nightmare. And then, of course, there's lack of engagements, which leads to that buzzword that seemed to crop up during COVID of quiet quitting, right? It's been around since COVID. You never heard that before. And I think that poor leadership combined with poor culture can lead to some of your most valuable people having one foot out the door at all times. And that's kind of the quiet quitting thing, right? Like you come up, you do your job, you do just enough to get by, and then you're looking for the next gig. And that can permeate an organization, both from lack of training and certainly poor culture and obviously poor leadership.
Poor communication, all of the above. I agree.
Yeah.
I think also with leadership development and wanting your team either to get training, or employees want to learn. Employees want to stay at a job, right? They want to work and they want to have a passion and they want to make good money. So if there's no trajectory put in front of them, they're more likely to want to leave and leave sooner, which does increase that turnover rate. And I think if you offer them right from the get-go, even we like to say at Wiser to pre-board your team members or start to recruit and let employees know about your culture, about why it's so great to work here, give them, some expectations. And then once they start with you and using Wiser, we like to also give our clients a path in that sense as well. Give them everything they need. Help them know that, what time orientation starts, where they need to go get all their things. So a pre-board checklist, and handhold them rather than just letting them off. Most people think onboarding, a lot of people get onboarding and orientation mixed up too. So onboarding is going to be that longer process. So be there for them, give them the right tools to be successful rather than setting them up to leave so soon.
I also think it's really important to get the company's buy-in, right? If you can show that it's an ROI and they're going to make money in the end, then the training is worthwhile, right? Like we always say, why does it get cut first? Well, it's because it's one of those easy things to eliminate in a budget because it's a soft cost, right? Like that's like the first thing people want to cut. But in the end, they end up hurting themselves. With overall, if we can show that we can help them improve and make more money at the end of the day, the training becomes much more valuable. I think for most of us that come from gaming, right, it's customer service. And I think that can be from Players Club, which I managed for years and years. If you have a poor experience, right, you're not going to not only come back to that casino, you're going to tell 4 or 5 other people about your experience and how horrible it was. And so I think from dealers to housekeeping, from like everybody that you touch, it really is important that we stress. And I think guest service starts with great leadership, right? Like it's that having that leader who comes down the floor and talks and walks the floor and talks to everybody, right? Like it's really important. And I think that that's what gets lost a lot. And I think that having great leadership is something that is learned through great teaching, right? But it's also something that people are born with to a certain extent. Most of the people that I look up to, right, were those leaders that you would see that walked the floor and knew the names of everybody that they touched and had an interaction with, right? So I think it's really important because that is where you're going to get that great guest service. And then you're going to talk about, like people talk about Nordstrom, right? Like the service that you get. It's the same experience if you have a great experience when you're playing cards and you've got a dealer and you're like, oh my God, I got to go back to that table because I had such a great time, right? I don't care if I'm losing money, but I had a great experience, right? So that's the same kind of experience that can happen across your entire enterprise from any industry, not only just gaming.
And I think with what Brenda's saying, if regarding like the casino business, maybe leaders don't see how that customer service is affecting them or impacting their revenue on a daily basis when that person wasn't treated very well at the table, or, and so millions of dollars might be walking out the door if they're not trained on their vision and pillars and guest services, and they don't have that leader coming down and doing the things that Brenda said made such a great impression on her with the places she's worked and why they were known for their service at some of the places she's worked.
And who knows better than the people actually doing the work, right? The people on the floor. If they feel like they can't engage management at any level and or certainly senior leadership, they just don't talk anymore, right? They just come on, they show up, they do their job. And you know what? You might have, going back to casino, you might have one slot tech, right, who manages a certain part of the floor, who has this amazing idea to move machines 4 feet one way or 4 feet the other to get better yield because there's more traffic on that particular area of the walkway. If he doesn't feel like he can tell somebody, guess what? He won't tell anybody. It's that incremental revenue is just going right past him every day, and he sees it, but he feels like, yes, heck with that, nobody cares what I think. That's the worst scenario for any company. And I don't care if it's fast food, auto manufacturing, if the rank and file feel like they don't have somewhat of a voice or at least a channel, that's bad. If you have a company and you're the owner or the president or the GM, and all of a sudden you just don't have those disposable dollars for your, learning and development budget, my saying is let's talk about it, right? So, if you don't have a big budget, consider a mentoring program. Take some of your senior people. That doesn't cost you anything other than a little bit of time. And the other thing, in my experience, you'd be surprised at how many existing employees would love to mentor somebody, especially a younger person, but they don't get a chance because that concept doesn't exist. And the other thing I say is say it out loud, right? So be honest with the employees about the fact, hey, we don't have a big L&D budget at the moment, but your training is very important to the organization. That goes a long way with them. That encourages them to do some LinkedIn learning, maybe spend $30 on a Coursera course. If you encourage them to keep improving, that works. And I think lastly, you take a look at cloud-based training and learning systems like Wiser, where for a few dollars per employee per month, they can access hundreds of e-learning courses. Management likes it because they can see which courses their employees are consuming, when, and how effective, and there's full visibility. And then the platform also allows for a high degree of customization because, there are certain soft skills that are kind of ubiquitous, right? Leadership development and so forth, but most organizations have specific needs, and we're able to really hone in on that and then, create content that will resonate with the employee. And that, bubbles up throughout the organization. And over time, you're changing culture. You've got highly trained and engaged employees, and then you win.
I always say a good lunch and learn is a good way of getting your team together and getting your educational message or your cultural message or your explainer video or how to. So lunch and learns are good ways if you're working on a budget. And to back up Kevin on that, with our platform, you can actually schedule events like that. So if it's lunch with your GM or come learn about why bloodborne pathogens are so important to learn and safety or something, you can schedule that right on the platform and communicate. So that internal communication's going on, as well as keeping that training that's not taking away so much. It's not being so disruptive to the employees' daily tasks.